President Trump has upgraded an attack on two Saudi oil facilities to a, quote, global crisis. He's also blaming Iran for a coordinated attack. Monday, the president tweeted, "There is reason to believe we know the culprit are locked and loaded, depending on verification." He went on to say, remember when Iran shot down a drone, saying knowingly that it was there in their airspace, when in fact it was nowhere close. Now they say they had nothing to do with the attack on Saudi Arabia. We'll see. The president's comment have raised concern amongst the United States' involvement. Here to weigh in on this, as well as last week's canceled peace talks with the Taliban, is the former CIA director, General David Petraeus. General, thank you so much for joining me.
Good to be with you, Sagar. Thanks.
Absolutely. General, let's begin with Iran. As somebody, former CIA director, your long experience as CENTCOM within the region, what is your estimation of the president threatening the use of force against Iran on behalf of Saudi Arabia? That was the words that were implied there. What's your opinion on that, sir?
Well, first, let's just put ourselves in the shoes of those who are in the White House and the Pentagon and various of the intelligence community agencies, as everyone has no doubt very feverishly been putting together all of the different sources of intelligence that have been made available, whether it is imagery intelligence, perhaps some signals intelligence, perhaps something in the internet, whatever, human intelligence, undoubtedly. So all of that is being put together to determine precisely who launched these attacks, even to understand what the projectiles of the missiles or drone strikes were, and then from where they were launched. Was the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps part and parcel of this? I would assume so. But again, you just can't go into the Oval Office and say, we assume this. There's going to have to be very precise attribution and a clear determination of what has taken place. Then, of course, there's also got to be an assessment ongoing about how long it's going to take Aramco, the Saudi state-owned oil company, to get this production back online. This does affect somewhere between 5 and 6% of the global oil production. So this is not a trivial strike. This is the most substantial facility, concentrated facility of its type in the world. And obviously you've seen in energy markets the spike as a result of these attacks. Then there's going to be intensive discussions with our Saudi partners, with perhaps others in the region. Undoubtedly, the commanders on the ground out there, of course, the U.S. Central Command, which I was privileged to be between Iraq and Afghanistan, is assessing not only the options for some kind of strike, some kind of retaliation, but also a whole variety of different force protection measures. Because it's not enough just to say, what should we do to them? Then there also has to be the assessment of what is it that they will do to the Saudis, to us, to our bases, perhaps some of our partners and ally in the region. And we've got to be very sure that we have adequate defenses, adequate ballistic missile defense in early warning and all the rest of this. So this is a very complex process that is playing out right now. And by the way, on top of all of that, the Saudis just had a new minister for oil installed last week. He's a half-brother of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And Aramco is contemplating a sort of IPO. It would be a part of the company. And that value of that, obviously, that determined a great deal by how the market regards Aramco resilience, how it regards the risk they would be taking if there is an investment in Aramco, and literally the valuation itself will depend on these kinds of factors. So this is a very, very complex situation in a very risky, tenuous moment in the Gulf.
So, General, would this rise to the use of force level for the United States of America in your interest in attack on Saudi Arabia? It's not necessarily a treaty nation. In your estimation, does this rise to something that the United States should be using force in order to enforce within the region?
Well, it's really hard to say that right now, Sagar. I think that what you've got to do is determine really where did the attack come from? Who was it that launched them? Again, how serious is the damage? Again, this is quite a shock to the energy markets. Needless to say, way over 10% spike in crude oil prices today. And then again, how serious is it in terms of how long this particular production capability will be offline? But I think much too soon to start rendering judgments that we should or should not use force, presumably, to get with the Saudis and perhaps some others in the region. And by the way, of course, at the same time, we're also no doubt talking in various capitals in Europe, and the intelligence community is undoubtedly seeing what they have identified, because this is always a bit of a coalition effort that no one of us is necessarily smarter than all of us together.
General, you've long served in the region. You know what it's like in order to deal with the Iranian malfeasance within Iraq. Have you seen an escalation in Iranian behavior that rises to the threat that it poses to the United States for this long in some time? In other words, is there a bigger threat from Iran today than there has been in the years that we've been involved in the region?
Well, certainly Iran is very, very active and exploiting situations in places like Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, still supporting Hezbollah and Hamas and so forth. So the opportunities for them have actually expanded, and they are very opportunistic, and they are indeed trying to make the most of the Syrian civil war, of the threat that ISIS posed to Iraq, of the Yemeni civil war, essentially the north-south, all of these different situations. Having said that, they provided the means for killing our soldiers, well over 600 or so of them, quite a number during the period that I was privileged to command in Iraq during the surge in particular. And that was very, very escalatory, if you will, and very provocative. And we sought to do what we could in quite an aggressive manner, but certainly within the realm of Iraq, rather than going across the border. So this is what you have, though, is a situation where, of course, Iran has meant what it said, it appears. Iran said that if they can't export oil, they're not going to allow others to export oil either. And we've seen a growing number of quite significant actions by Iran, attacking ships in the Gulf, essentially kidnapping or taking control of others, shipping oil against sanctions to Syria, shooting down a $130 million U.S. drone, and on and on. So we've seen quite a series of provocative actions. This is a very significant escalation, however.
Yeah. So, General, while we also have you, we'd like to get your thoughts on Afghanistan. You were also the commander in that country. What is your opinion on a potential peace deal with the Taliban? And do you think that the president and his team are going about this the right way as somebody who's involved at the highest levels of these discussions?
Well, as I've said publicly, I was pleased to see him reject what appeared to be a plan for some kind of agreement with the Taliban. And I say that for a variety of reasons. One is, of course, just remember history. Remember how the Taliban allowed al-Qaeda to have a sanctuary in eastern Afghanistan when they controlled the bulk of the country. And that it was in that sanctuary that al-Qaeda planned the 9/11 attack and conducted the initial training for them. Keep in mind that al-Qaeda and now the Islamic State are trying to reestablish a caliphate or a sanctuary in roughly the same area of eastern Afghanistan. Keep in mind that the Taliban don't control all of the other insurgent and extremist groups that are making life difficult for the Afghan people and for their security forces. They don't really control the Haqqani network, the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, the Pakistani Taliban, or the other two groups that I mentioned earlier, al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, and there are some others as well. Those are the significant. Finally, I'm not even sure that the Taliban could even get all of the Taliban fighters to lay down their arms. And I have serious doubts about what the Taliban would do were we to leave the country, and how that country would then be run. And would it devolve into another civil war as followed the collapse of the Soviet-supported Afghan government some 2 years after the Soviets left Afghanistan, when they stopped the flow of resources to the Afghan government. That was a horrific period for Afghanistan. Kabul was almost destroyed during that period. And I fear that you could see that kind of a return to that kind of fighting between not just these different insurgent and terrorist groups that I've mentioned, but also by some of the other groups that were controlled and still are in many respects by various of the warlords of other ethnic and sectarian groupings in northern Afghanistan.
Well, General David Petraeus, thank you so much for joining me and give us your thoughts. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure to be with you, Suk.
Absolutely. We'll have more Rising for you after this.